There's a lot of stuff in psychology about sense of self and what happens when you learn something about yourself or do something that is in conflict with your idea of yourself. It can be very disorienting and it can be a very emotional experience, but that's also how people tend to grow, because you say this other thing that I didn't like is a part of me, and now that I know that, I can work towards changing that.
Hello, salut, bonjour. Welcome to The Lost Bay, a show about indie RPG creators and artists and what's behind their creative processes. I'm Iko. Today my guest is Sam Lee, designer of the solo RPG Anamnesis. Anamnesis is a journaling game for one player. In the game you wake up with no memory whatsoever of who and where you are, and through a series of beautifully designed questions and with the help of a deck of tarot cards, you will bit by bit recover your lost memory. I recorded this interview little after Sam had just released the beta version of her game. And as I released this episode, Sam has just published a new version of the game with new art, editing, and layout. In a while, we'll be talking about the core themes of the game: identity, sense of self, and memory loss. But first, here is Sam about why she decided to use tarot cards in the game. What's your relationship with tarots? I mean, were you familiar with tarots before the game, or?
I've used them a couple times for readings. I do have a couple of friends who are more familiar with tarot and who do readings more frequently. And one of my friends did a reading for me virtually, because of the pandemic. It was a really interesting experience because she was explaining to me how tarot isn't necessarily about prediction, how tarot can kind of help guide you into the directions that you want to take. So if you have like a certain thing in mind, a thing that you're working towards, or a certain aspect of your life that you are thinking about a lot, then you can do a tarot reading to not have it predict what you should do next, not have it tell you the actions that you should take, but rather help you think through this concept and rather to see what you gravitate towards during the reading.
Now, basically, it's like you're reading yourself, not really the future, not really your future, but you're reading more yourself, right?
If you're faced with a bunch of different decisions, right? Or if you're faced with a lot of options in front of you in life, then you can do a tarot reading to really kind of dig deeper into how you feel about them. So for me, when my friend did this reading for me, it was a really cool experience because I had never thought of tarot that way. And I think after that reading, I felt that I wanted to do a little bit more with tarot. I felt that it was a really cool tool for anamnesis.
So throughout the game, you will be asked a series of questions, and a deck of tarots will help or guide you in answering those questions and thus recovering your memory. That's the core mechanic of the game. So the deck you pick, the way it feels or looks, might have some influence in the way you play and on the overall game experience. I've played Anamnesis using the tarot deck designed by Pamela Colman Smith in 1910, also called the Rider-Waite-Smith Tarot, and I understand that, especially in the USA or in the UK, it is perceived somehow as being a classic deck of cards, the classic deck of tarots, maybe. It's really beautiful and expressive, and that's the same deck that Sam uses to play her own game. I was just wondering if this deck means something to you, or if it's just a beautiful deck that you found. And
I picked it up maybe around a year ago. Honestly, the reason I got it was because it was just, from my understanding, more of the kind of classic deck. It was the cards that most people associate with tarot. And so I kind of wanted to start with that one. But with that said, it is still my favorite deck that I've come across. The cards are just so evocative. Like they're overall fairly simple in design, but each card evokes a different emotion. And just in like flipping through the deck, it can be very striking, especially the swords cards, at least for me.
Totally.
Yeah.
I think it's the Nine of Swords. There's a figure sitting on the bed at night, holding their head.
Mm-hmm.
I feel it represents anxiety and
Yeah.
insomnia, and yeah, the swords are so expressive.
That's interesting too, because like for you, it feels like it represents anxiety. For me, I look at that and I feel like it represents regret. Like, and that's really cool too, is how different people can look at these cards and feel different things from them or take different meaning from them. I think that they are so incredible as a story tool because of that, because you can look at them and you can take different meaning from them.
Do you do like a free form reading of each card, or do you rather try to read it through its classical meaning? What's your take on the cards?
I personally like to use the classic meaning only because I feel like the classic meaning of the cards is really helpful for me in brainstorming. It kind of provides this base to jump off of. I don't know by memory what all the cards mean. I have a little guide about it, so I'll draw a card and I'll look it up and kind of read more about it. But I wanted this game to be accessible for people who don't know very much about tarot. I don't want people to feel like they can't play this game if they have never used a deck of tarot cards before. This wasn't very clear in the original draft of the game, in the beta version, but in the new text of the game, Marks and I kind of clarified that, whatever way you want to read the cards is valid. So whether it's through the traditional meanings of the cards, whether it's just the feeling that the card evokes when you see the picture drawn on it, any of that is fine.
So, Anamnesis is a solo journaling RPG game about self discovery. It's played with a pen and a deck of tarot cards. It's not your classical D20 or D6 RPG game, but somehow the path that led Sam to Anamnesis started with Dungeons and Dragons.
I started playing in college. So my first game was D&D 5th edition, actually. And it was after I was listening to the Adventure Zone, the podcast, got really interested in trying it myself. I had played a couple of sessions of Pathfinder back in high school, but didn't really know what I was doing. It was mostly people just telling me, hey, oh, you can pick this thing or do that thing, and just kind of a very loose understanding of the rules. But it wasn't until college that I really wanted to give D&D a good try. Rounded up a couple of friends, a couple of new people who I didn't know, and also my brother. And it was awesome. I really fell in love with RPGs during that time. And it wasn't until very recently that I even discovered the indie scene. I think it was because of Kickstarter, maybe. I think I was just browsing on Kickstarter, saw all of these different TTRPGs that I'd never heard of, and then, started backing a couple. And then when I got them into my hands, I was like, this is awesome. Why haven't I heard of this before? It kind of spiraled from there.
When did you discover solo RPGs, and have you played them yourself? Are you a solo RPG player?
I am. They are newer to me also because of just being newer to the scene in general. I think the first solo game I ever played was The Portal at Hill House by Travis Hill and Lindy Ferris Hill. And I just fell in love with it. It's like this cosmic horror game about making your way through this house and trying to find these weird objects. And it was also a journaling game. And I played that and I just had such an incredible experience. I hadn't been writing prose that much recently. And so I was a little bit out of the habit of just regular writing. But as soon as I opened up that game and got into it, the words just flowed. So I have played a handful of them. I still have so many more that I want to give a shot. Yeah, I really like how personal they can be. When you're playing with a group of people, it's a ton of fun, and there's so many unique experiences that can come from playing with a group. But being able to play a solo game means that you can influence the story in the way that you want to. You have more control over the mood and the environment. It can ultimately be a more personal story to you. That's something that I really enjoy about them, and it's something that I wanted to emulate in Anamnesis as well.
Sam started fiddling with the D&D character sheet project that gradually stripped itself of the Dungeons and Dragon-esque classical elements like dice, stats, or GM and transformed into what became Anamnesis.
The original concept that Anamnesis came from was extremely different than the game that it turned out to be. I had this idea a while ago of creating a one shot for D&D about basically handing players blank character sheets, and the GM has all of the filled out character sheets. As the players play the game, they gradually learn more about themselves and like their role in the town that they find themselves in, and they gradually fill out more of their blank character sheet as they learn their own stats and skills and things. So I kind of wanted to originally make something like that. Then I thought, well, I kind of want to move away from D&D. Like, can I make this into its own game? So maybe I should just do a solo game where you have like one person and you have a blank character sheet and you gradually figure out stuff and fill in the sheet. And then I'm like, well, what if we ditch the character sheet, right? And just like tell this story about like learning about yourself. And then what if we use tarot to do it? So it kind of just went in a wildly different direction. It ultimately turned into something that I was not expecting at all. It ended up being a larger project than I was planning for it to be, and I'm pretty happy though with the result.
Anamnesis is beautifully designed. It's simple and elegant, and yet extremely evocative. The design choices supports the theme of the game, which is memory loss and memory recovery. And on a personal note, I've experienced myself, like in real life, long-term memory loss. I was lucky enough to recover my memory, and playing Sam's game felt a lot like what I had experienced myself, but in a fun and more surprising way. Yeah, I've got several questions about the design of the game. The game is about memory loss, or rather recovering your memories. So I was wondering, yeah, how did you decide to build the game around that idea?
Part of it did come from this initial idea I had with the blank character sheet, and that eventually evolved into Anamnesis. That was just kind of a thread that was pulled through the entire way. But I think that memory is a really fascinating way to explore character and story. I've been really drawn to games that have to do with memory. Necronautilus has a whole memory aspect to it that I absolutely love, where your characters don't remember their past lives and you gradually uncover more memories and use them in the game as skills. And then also, I'm GMing a Blades in the Dark campaign, and the use of flashbacks, for example, is kind of a unique way to use memory. So I think that memory is just a really cool concept to have in games. I think there's a lot you can do with it. I also am kind of interested in it because in college I studied neuroscience and psychology. And so that whole field talks a lot about memory and about the reliability of memory. And I think that that could be a really interesting concept to play with in a game.
Is there something more specific that you studied that informed the way you wrote, about memory loss?
There's a lot of stuff in psychology about sense of self and what happens when you learn something about yourself or do something that is in conflict with your idea of yourself. It can be very disorienting and it can be a very emotional experience. And some people, when they do something or say something or realize something that doesn't fit into their sense of self, will brush it aside, will ignore it, will try to forcibly integrate it into who they are. Other people will go through more of a journey of like learning more about themselves and figuring out where this piece fits in and whether they like it and if they think that they need to change. And so I think anamnesis kind of deals with that a little bit. You wake up, you are this person who doesn't remember anything about yourself. But as you play, you develop a character who has some sort of personality. And the things that you realize about your past may or may not align with your current personality in the game. One of the later acts of the game deals more with how you feel about what you've discovered about yourself and what you do now that you have that knowledge. So I think that's kind of the main thing with it, is just this idea in psychology about how how it can be a very lengthy and difficult process to change the sense of who you are. It can be very difficult to do, but that's also how people tend to grow, because you say this other thing that I didn't like is a part of me, and now that I know that, I can work towards changing that. So that's a little bit of what anamnesis is about. Not everyone's past self in anamnesis is going to be a quote unquote bad person. Another thing that I wanted to do with this game was make sure that your present and your past can be very multi layered. But there are things that you might learn that you don't like, and kind of grappling with that and moving forward with that knowledge is an important part of the game.
There is no setting in the game. The setting, the mood, the time periods are entirely up to you. You can play a medfan, a sci-fi, a contemporary game, whatever craziness you wish. With each step of the game, you will create or recover a piece of your memory with the help of a series of prompts or questions, and so at the same time, you'll create a setting in which your character evolves.
My design process revolved a lot around making sure that people could tell the story that they wanted to tell. I wanted to make sure that the setting was very neutral, that people could play a game in any type of genre or time period. The original draft of this game had some prompts that were about technology. So in one of the prompts, you find a cell phone in your pocket and you can like look through it to learn more about yourself. But then I realized that I wanted to make this game more vague as far as the time period goes. So any prompts about technology, cell phones, laptops, that sort of thing were removed and replaced with other ones. A lot of my design process was about making prompts that were flexible enough that people could kind of use them anywhere, and then also that hopefully would not conflict with each other. Basically, I didn't want anyone to read a prompt and feel like it didn't belong in their story. I wanted to make sure that the prompts were very reachable to people.
So, and how did you write the questions? I mean, it's a huge work. I mean, what was the writing process? Did you just write a bunch of questions and organize them, or what?
After I did some initial brainstorming with it and just wrote down everything I could think of, for specific acts, I put myself in certain settings in order to help me brainstorm. For example, the second act has to do with walking around this town or city that you find yourself in. So I actually went downtown and I walked around for a while and just kind of observed, like saw what type of buildings there were to see, the people walking on the street in order to help me generate some of these prompts. And it actually worked really well.
Where was that? Downtown? What can you tell us?
I live in New Hampshire, so it's actually kind of this very small town environment. You know, maybe if I was in the middle of a big city, I would have generated some different prompts. So just kind of like walking up and down that main street for a little bit. I spent a little while on a nice day. Yeah, just kind of walked around. And then once I thought of a prompt, I just jotted it down on my phone. And then once I had enough prompts for each act, I chose the ones that I felt fit the themes best, that I felt most stories could apply, and stuck with those.
Okay, that's cool process. Trying to put yourself in the situation in which the character would be. That's really super interesting process. Oh, by the way, I've never thought about that, but I recorded myself when I played instead of writing because you mentioned it
Okay,
in the
yeah.
game. You said you could be an audio journaling,
Mhm.
and which is so obvious. But if I hadn't read it into the game rules, I wouldn't have thought about it. And I was wondering, have you read or listened to some stories or chronicles? I don't know how to call them of games by other players.
I had told a couple of my friends about making this game, and two of them offered to play test it for me. And so I did get their feedback, which was extremely valuable. One of my playtesters sent me what they wrote. One of my other friends played the game after it was released, and they sent me what they had wrote as well. And it was really fascinating to read because they were such different stories. And then I actually did play the game with a friend where it was mostly me guiding him through the game because he didn't own a deck of tarot cards. So I had the deck of tarot and would do the draws for him. And he was doing most of the character creation. He made this really wild story where the whole thing took place in a giant airport. And there was some weird, like, eldritch creature at the bottom of the airport that people were making sacrifices to, and he was playing as some sort of security guard at this airport. So very bizarre story that I would have never guessed or ever come up with this game. I know someone who played this game. It was a very personal experience for them because they wrote about some stuff that they are grappling with their own life, but they told it through the eyes of a different character. And they kind of told me afterwards about how it was a really like great experience for them because it was helpful for them to explore these pieces of their own identity without using themselves as the character, kind of being able to kind of put this on this other fictional person and explore it through that. So very different stories, and which is really what I was going for with it. So it was really cool to hear about.
A few months ago, Sam released a beta version of the game. She did a niche funding, a crowdfunding using the game distribution platform itch.io to fund a fully finalized version of the game with new editing, layout, and art. The new version of the game is online now. I'll put a link to her itch.io page in the show notes. Be sure to check it. So again, we recorded this episode before the final release of the game. So in the next bit, Sam is going to talk about all the things that were in process of being made for the final version of the game. Well, they're all completed as of now.
So Mark Shepard just helped me with the editing. So I worked with them to just clean up the text of the game. And they also did some content editing where, they read through all the questions and let me know if they felt like any of the prompts were a bit weak, if they felt like any denoted a specific time period or setting. So they really went through that and also pointed out any prompts that were too similar, for example. And we come through those, edited them, replaced some of the prompts. Also added a new section for examples of play where we have two different scenarios of people playing the game to give the player a little bit more insight or a little bit more direction if they feel like there's not enough instruction. So we went through that, and then I'm working with Victor Winter on the art of the game. He's making original art. So the cover image that is there right now is public domain and is going to be replaced by the cover art that he draws. And I think it really evokes the kind of mood that we're going for with it. Some of the art is like slightly almost hazy in a way, just like tiniest bit, maybe surreal, just a little, to kind of emulate that feeling of confusion, of waking up and not remembering things, and like things being at the tip of your tongue, right at the front of your memory, but you can't quite grab it. That's kind of the feeling that we're going for with a lot of the art. And then I just started working with Thomas Manuel about the layout. So he is going to be doing the layout of the game. We just kind of had a meeting where we talked about the direction with it, but we're right at the beginning of that process. So that's kind of overall what's changing. So there'll be new layout, original art, and then some changes to the text to kind of polish it up a little.
That was Sam Lee, designer of the solo RPG game Anamnesis. Again, I'll put the link to the itch.io page where you can download the game in the show notes. Sam is also working on another game. I can't tell much about it. It's a journaling game that involves virtual worlds, multi-dimensional setting, and a journey of growth as you leave things behind. The Lost Bay is a podcast about indie RPG creators and artists and what's behind their creative processes. It's produced by me, Iko, and music is by Every Eyes. If you want to get in touch or get news about the podcast, you can find me on Twitter at The Lost Bay. Thank you so much for listening and salut, à bientôt.